Within hours of taking office, President Trump signed a slew of executive actions underscoring his intent to promote fossil fuels and roll back America's progress on climate change and clean energy. Let's bring in former Treasury official and Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner. And as Los Angeles burns, Steve, tell us about it.
Yeah, Mika, it's really quite extraordinary, the number of things he's done. But let's start with drill, baby, drill, what Trump is talking about in terms of really ramping up our oil and gas production. And he also declared a national energy emergency. But it's really perplexing as to why he called for a national energy emergency, given that we are actually producing oil and gas at record amounts. We have gone from being a significant importer of oil in particular, as everybody knows, briefly became an exporter during COVID, but that was COVID related. But then under Biden, we've become a bigger exporter of oil and gas than we have ever been before in our history. And so who knows where this whole idea of a national energy emergency and drill, baby, drill comes from. But at the same time, he has also pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. And this is a really big deal because obviously, as things like Los Angeles demonstrate, we have to address our impact on the climate and global warming. In 2018, we were pretty much on a flatline trajectory in terms of not increasing but not decreasing our emissions. But a whole bunch of stuff that happened since then, the Inflation Reduction Act, limits on tailpipe emissions, the emphasis on renewable energy, had put us on an extraordinary path down, really to almost meet the targets that have been set for our energy emissions. Rolling this back probably puts us more back to here. And so instead of helping the world's climate problem, we go back to hurting it at a time when, as we can see, the planet is literally burning up.
Of course, Steve, this is the second time that Donald Trump has pulled us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He pulled us out of his first term. Joe Biden put us back in. And now, yet again, the United States has departed. But this is that's just one of the ways that climate change perhaps being exacerbated by what Donald Trump is doing. He's also taken aim at electric vehicle incentives, dismantling them. Talk to us why that's important.
Yeah, so about half of the fuel that we use, of the gasoline we use in this country, is for cars. And so reducing the amount of gasoline that we use is a critical part of reducing our energy usage and climate. And he is pulling back on our subsidies that were put in place as part of the Inflation Reduction Act at a time when America is actually lagging the world in terms of our adoption of electric vehicles. China, maybe surprisingly, maybe not to people, is actually the leader. Over 40% now, a little bit less than 40% last year of all the cars and vehicles sold in China were electric. Even Europe, at about 20%, is way ahead of us. We're down here at 10%. And so obviously pulling back on the incentives and the other restrictions on gasoline-powered vehicles, it does nothing to help us. Now, one person who might be helped by all this is Elon Musk. So Tesla had about a 75% share of electric vehicles, electric cars sold in this country. That's not unusual. They were the first mover. They had a great product. He did really well. The share's been coming down. Again, that's probably a natural effect of all the other car companies coming into the electric vehicle business. But Musk himself is on record as saying that pulling back these subsidies is actually good for him because his customers are stickier and they're more likely to keep buying these cars and his share will go up. And one little interesting fact, the stock market agrees with Musk. Since the election, Tesla stock is up 67%, which is brings it to a $1.3 trillion market value. General Motors, by comparison, has a $60 billion market value.
And Steve, take us to your third chart now, which are two early Trump priorities. First, the border, and the second, taking aim at the federal workforce.
Yeah, so let's talk about two other things that he's been doing. Obviously, the border, as you guys have already talked about, is front and center on Trump's mind. But what's interesting is that if you go back to the first Trump term, he actually released an average of about 30,000 undocumented immigrants a year who crossed the border but had been either charged or convicted of crimes back in their home country. And so you can see that. And this includes, by the way, 309 people who were either charged or convicted of murder. He released them into the country. And that was a reaction actually to an Obama policy. Obama had prioritized this. Trump deprioritized it in favor of things like family separation and other policies. Biden turned that around, and you can see here how much the number of people who are were charged or convicted of crimes back home got released in the country. So Trump's record in the first term is really quite extraordinary compared to what happened under Biden. Let's talk about another issue, which is the federal workforce. He's already put a 90-day freeze on hiring in the federal government, taken a bunch of other steps that we're aware of to try to, what he calls, rein in the federal workforce. But what is it we're reining in? The federal civilian workforce, which is just under 2.3 million people, has actually grown very slowly. It's only up by 100,000, about 4%. All the way back to 1981 at the time of Ronald Reagan. The U.S. population is up 30%. And what's also interesting to note, and by the way, these little spikes are census hiring, but what's interesting to note is that the biggest reduction in the federal workforce actually came under Clinton in the 90s. And in fact, the increases in the federal workforce have all come under Republicans, from Reagan, Bush, to G.W. Bush, and then to Trump himself actually increased the federal workforce during his first term.
Morning Joe, economic analyst Steve Ratner with his charts. Thank you very much for coming on this morning.